151. The leader of the commoner faction had fallen. And with that, this battle became hopelessly lost. The crowd was completely silent, so much so that you could hear a pin drop, along with the sound of their heartbreaks and despairful realization. All of them couldn't deny that while he was forced on his back foot a few times, Samael had actually been very methodical and sort of dominant throughout the fight. And now he was going to win it. But while everyone had lost hope, two people were still standing. And they had yet to give up. Damn it, Erwin gritted his teeth, looking through his sniper's scope, waiting for Samael to give a peek. While Reiner had flattened most of the training field, a large part of it was still strewn with jagged spikes and tall pillars that Samael had erupted. While fighting Reiner, and even after defeating him, Samael had been sure to never step out of his cover long enough for Erwin to get a clear shot. And that was all he needed. Just one clear shot, just one bullet that could find its mark on his head or chest, and it would be over. The faculty wouldn't let Samael die, but Erwin would win by technicality. Right then, the girl standing a few steps beside him spoke up. This was one of the rare times Erwin heard Sylin Mordain speak, since she always either communicated by writing or through telepathy. "I'm going in," she said, summoning 2 cards. "What, are you crazy?" Erwin scowled. "He'll wipe the floor with you." "I know," Sylin nodded. "But after collecting himself, he's going to rush us anyway. He'll use his movement ability. He'll be fast. I'll engage him. I only need to stop him for a single second. Be ready to shoot him down." Erwin blinked. Wow, even when she talked, her instructions remained so short and direct. Regardless, he had to admit, it was a good plan for a final stand. If she could draw him out of the cover and restrict him for even a single second, Erwin could lead them to victory. There was just one problem with that plan that they failed to consider. They were up against Samael Theosbane. Instead of coming out of the cover and giving them a chance to prolong this battle, the ace did something completely unexpected. From behind the concrete pillar where he was, Samael started throwing a salvo of flaming arrows up high in the air. By the time Erwin and Sylin noticed that a few dozen arrows had already begun raining down from the sky like a blazing meteor shower. Boom, boom, boom. None of the arrows reached them, but they crashed into the ground and exploded. The explosions kicked up large swirling clouds of dust, obstructing Erwin's view. "Oh, like hell I'll let you do that, you bastard." Erwin yelled to himself and shot down the remaining arrows in midair, detonating them in the sky. But Samael paid it no mind. He had created enough cover. With the help of Flash Step he dashed from one cloud of dust to another, moving closer to Erwin and Sylin with each sprint. Occasionally, he threw a few flame arrows toward them, but Erwin shot them down as well. Then, for a moment, everything turned quiet. Samael didn't make any moves. The silence was unsettling. Erwin swept his eyes across the arena, when, as if on cue, he heard the earth split open behind them. He was going to do it again. He must have gone underground in one of the dust clouds, and was about to jump out from behind them. It was just like how he took out Leora and Reiner. That cocky bastard had the audacity to use the same trick on them thrice. Explore Hidden Tales at My Virtual Library Empire. Reacting quickly, Erwin turned his head around, but instantly realized something was off. And right then, as if to confirm his suspicion, Sylin's voice echoed in his mind, "It's a trap." Erwin also realized that as he caught a glimpse of the crack and noticed it was far too shallow. It was a diversion, a trap to distract them. All of it only happened in a split second. Erwin didn't even move his sniper. Sylin's call was immediate, but that split-second distraction was all the time Samael needed to make his move. Erwin couldn't react in time as a fiery arrow struck his rifle and detonated. His weapon exploded into incandescent splinters and burning shrapnels, one of which streaked too close to Erwin's eye and singed his eyelashes. Arg! He stumbled back, crying out in pain and summoning an item card. A golden handgun began materializing in his grasp. But by then, a flaming lash shot out from the nearest dust cloud and coiled around Sylin's wrist like a noose. Her mouth opened in a scream, but no sound escaped, only a strangled gasp as the burning whip seared into her flesh. Then, with tyrannical force tugging at it, the whip yanked her off balance and flung her through the air before slamming her into a concrete log that hadn't been there moments ago. Before she could recover, Samael burst from the settling dust and headed straight for her. Still reeling, Sylin gritted her teeth and shoved herself up, her one good arm lashing out. An icicle shard formed in her palm and shot toward him. Normally, the golden-haired boy would have dodged with ease. But maybe because he was so exhausted and hurt, his movements were just a fraction too slow. The ice shard sliced across his cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. But that was all. That was all the damage she could inflict before he closed in. She tried to throw a punch, but Samael slipped under it and slithered around her. From behind, he hammered his knee into her back, striking right where her kidney should have been with such merciless force that Scyllane's body arched forward violently. Her breath hitched as agony shot through her spine. Before she could react, his hand clamped around her neck and he lifted her off the ground. And then, he started running. Straight toward Erwin, who now had a revolver in hand. That bastard. He was using Scyllane as a literal meat shield to close the distance. Erwin raised his revolver, trying to steady his aim, but his fingers trembled on the trigger. That was when Scyllane's voice rang in his mind. "Shoot," she screamed. "Shoot him through me. We have to take him out right here, Erwin. This is our only chance. Do it." That moment stretched into eternity. Erwin's grip tightened on the gun. His heart raced. His sights were aligned, the golden barrel leveled at Samael's charging form. He had a clean shot, straight through Scyllane's torso. But his fingers refused to move. "Do it." Scyllane's voice rang in his head, raw and desperate. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't hesitating. She had already accepted what needed to be done. But Erwin, he couldn't. Samael was nearly upon him now. His eyes gleamed with a cold, razor-sharp focus, like a predator going for the kill. There was no doubt in his expression, no hesitation in his stride. At the last possible second, Erwin jerked the gun away, aiming for Samael's shoulder instead. Bang! The shot fired, but it was too late. With inhuman reflexes, Samael twisted mid-charge, shifting his weight just enough for the bullet to graze past his shoulder instead of striking deep. And then, before Erwin could fire another round, Samael threw Scyllane aside like a broken doll and closed the remaining distance in an instant. A fist crashed into Erwin's gut. All the air in his lungs was violently forced out. His vision blurred from the sheer force of the impact, and his feet lifted off the ground for a brief moment before he crumpled onto his knees. He barely had a second to cough before Samael grabbed him by the hair, yanking his head back. "You hesitated," Samael murmured. His voice was calm, almost indifferent. Erwin's dazed, pain-filled eyes met Samael's. "You can't afford to hesitate when you're pathetically weak." And with that, Samael drove his knee into Erwin's face. A sickening crack echoed through the silent battlefield. Erwin's vision went black. The battle was over. Scyllane was still struggling to get up, but she had no chance alone. Not in her state. Samael drove a brutal kick into her gut, forcing a choked gasp from her lips. He then gripped the back of her head, dragged her on all fours, and slammed her face into the log. Bomb! Scyllane's body slumped at his feet. Samael let out a deep breath and touched the concrete log, crudely molding it into the shape of a chair, or was it a throne perhaps? Whatever term was more appropriate in that situation. Dismissing all his cards, he turned and sat back down, planting his boot on Scyllane's fallen back like using her as some sort of a royal tuffet. It was dark by now. The floodlights illuminated the arena in a harsh glow. And there, seated above the wreckage of the battlefield and his fallen enemies, Samael was in the spotlight. Quite literally, people in the audience were looking at him with ranging emotions. Some with grudging admiration, others with seething hatred, a few in pure disbelief. And many, many in silent fear. Because what they had just witnessed wasn't a mere victory. It was domination. He had casually crushed some of the strongest cadets in their batch. Alone, the top 11 to 20. All of them, all taken down by a single man. In under 40 minutes. Sure, he hadn't walked away unscathed. He was injured and bruised and wounded, but that only made it worse. Because even battered and exhausted, Samael Kaiser Theosbane had never been in danger. With ruthless precision, he had dismantled his opponents. One by one, merciless, unrelenting, inevitable. In one word, he was unstoppable. No matter what he was put through or how much he was hurt, he never stopped. And by the end of it, no one was left to stop him. There were many in the audience who wanted to hate him. And most still did. But beneath the resentment, beneath the bruised egos and clenched fists, there was something colder. A realization. Samael wasn't just strong, he was something else entirely. Something they couldn't hope to face. Something terrifying. He was undisputed. Samael leaned back against his throne, exhaling softly as his gaze washed over the crowd. He looked at them slowly, menacingly. Then, in a voice devoid of all emotions but disgust, he said it. "You're all weak." 152. Pain laced through my body in more places than I cared to count. My left leg could barely support my weight anymore, my back screamed in agony every time I tried to move, and each breath I took burned like there was a fire in my lungs. My chest was tight, and I had lost most of the sensation in my right forearm, which felt like it was being roasted over an open flame. That guy, Calum, was it, had an exceptionally irritating innate ability. Wounds inflicted by his sword didn't just hurt. They burned. If he'd landed a few more slashes, the pain might have been unbearable. Worst of all, I was still bleeding. Some wounds soaked through my clothes, others leaked sluggishly, but I could feel the continuous blood loss leaving me lightheaded, even while sitting. Maybe I had underestimated my opponents a little. They were strong. Well, obviously, they were just below the top 10 in rankings. Leon and Reiner were ranked 11 and 12, just shy of breaking into the elite tier. And the rest of them were no joke either. There was that sharpshooter, Erwin. He gave me the most trouble since I had to keep my focus split on him. And there was also that girl Vayna, the one who could turn invisible into shadows like a ghost. She managed to stab me in the back twice. Reiner was also a nuisance until he had a team to fight me with. Individually, they all were powerful. But together, they were a problem. Maybe I could use some of them in the future. Still, if I had been using the full strength of my circulation technique, I would have ended this much faster. And if I'd had Oriath, there wouldn't even have been a fight. But none of that mattered now. Because despite the odds, I had won. Michael immediately made the announcement. Medics took the unconscious bodies of Erwin and Scylla. But I remained seated, and no one in the audience moved either. It was finally time to deliver my cool, final boss-level speech. Hey, leaning back on my self-made throne, I looked up and gazed at the gathered crowd. My expression was one of utter indifference laced with a shred of disdain. It was very similar to the expression my father used to show me. Damn it, when I spoke, my voice dripped with nothing but disgust. You're all weak. Silence followed, not the stunned, reverent kind. No, this was the kind of silence that burned. The kind that they were going to remember for a long time, thick with resentment, disbelief, and just a hint of fear. Good. I raised my good hand and swept a pointing finger at them. I don't care if you're a lowborn or a high noble. I don't care if your dear father is the ruler of 4 seas or your loving mother is a back alley whore. I don't care if you were raised in a castle or an orphanage. I paused, then practically spat out the next words. You're all weak. I let the words hang in the air, enjoying the tension. The cadets shifted uncomfortably, some clenching their fists, others glaring daggers at me. They hated hearing it. They hated the fact that I could just say whatever I wanted and they couldn't do anything about it. There were no repercussions. Because I had power, and they had none, not against me. I stood up from my makeshift throne, swaying just a little. The medics rushed in again, this time to heal my injuries. But I pushed them aside and continued speaking. How dare you all? How dare you all be so pathetic? So weak. And yet, instead of striving to be better, to be stronger, you continue to fight amongst yourselves. You discriminate on the basis of birth and status, when the only thing that matters in this institute, no, in this world, is strength. The weight of my words pressed down on them, suffocating in its intensity. Their expressions twisted, shame, anger, and denial flickering across their faces like an open flame desperate for air. And I let it burn. My boots crunched against the blood-stained ground as I took another step forward. It was painful to move, but I didn't care. Because of my circulation technique, my endurance and pain tolerance were much higher than an average C ranker anyway. You think your lineage makes you strong? I scoffed. You think your money, your connections, your noble blood will save you? My gaze hardened, like daring someone to speak. Let me ask you something. When you're on the battlefield facing death, do you think it'll stop and ask for your family name? Or do you think it will applaud you for rising in society from slums and rags? A few flinched, others lowered their gazes. I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. The answer is no, no one cares. I let the words sink in, let them carve their way into their bones. It doesn't matter if you're a royal or a peasant. Strength is the only factor of greatness. And right now, none of you have it. Some took sharp breaths as their fists trembled. Others had their faces dropped like they'd been shown a mirror. Then, you bastard, someone finally flipped. Then, a few more joined the outburst. You think you're invincible. You think because you won today, you'll always be on top. How dare you act like you're better than us just because you're a little strong? You fucking bastard. It's easy for you to say all that because you never struggled in your life. Boo. Fuck you. I grinned, then threw my head back and laughed. I laughed until the arena fell into comparative silence once again. Finally, I shrugged. As I had said from the start of all this, I am better. And will I always be on top? That's the idea, yes. Any of you are free to prove me wrong. Climb the ranks and challenge me. Put me in my place. If you think I'm so wrong, then draw your judgment and punish me. The silence was absolute this time. That's what I thought, I sneered. The problem is not only that you all are weak, but also that you don't even have the guts to change that. I shook my head. You think that just because you're cadets at the most prestigious Awakened Institute, you've already achieved everything in life. Disgusting. You accept mediocrity. You cling to status, to heritage, to politics, things that mean nothing when faced with a real enemy. I took another step forward. Blood dripped from my fingers, staining the ground, but the medics didn't move to help me this time. Even they were too busy listening. So I drove the nail in deeper. You think I had it easy? I almost chuckled. I'm banished by my family. I came to the academy with not a single card in my arsenal and not one credit to my name. And yet, I still became the ace. Even today, some of the strongest cadets, nobles and commoners alike, stood no chance against me. Everything I have, I took. Everything I am, I forged. The weight of my words settled over them, but I wasn't done. I spread my arms wide, dramatically gesturing at the ruined battlefield. This is what true power looks like. Not names, not money, not privilege. Power is earned, through blood, through battle, through suffering. Then, I smirked and delivered the killing blow. Which is why, from this day forward, I won't allow any of you to afford weakness anymore. I tilted my head slightly. You all love your status, don't you? Your precious standings, your little competitions, your high-born arrogance, and your commoner pride. That sparked a reaction. Some cadets paled, others leaned forward with a frown. A few nobles scowled, a few commoners squinted. Fine, I said, let's make things interesting, then. From now on, I'm enacting a new rule. Every quarter, the top cadets will get the first pick of missions. First, the top 10. Then the top 50. The top 100 will get whatever scraps are left over. Everyone below them will get nothing. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, but I wasn't pressed on. Oh, and every quarter, there will also be a soft rank reset. A series of battle royales will be held. It'll be a chance for everyone to climb ranks faster. The only ones exempt will be the top 10. If you want a mission, if you want relevance, you fight for it. Chaos erupted. What? You can't do that. Missions are assigned by the instructors. By the academy. This is bullshit. Find more adventures on my virtual library empire. You're casting us aside just because we're low ranked. How the hell is that fair? Their outrage was understandable. Missions were everything. Completing high-level missions didn't just grant rewards and credits, it built reputations. Cadets who handled elite missions went on to become hunters worthy of history. They become legends. Some third years were already seen as future heroes, all because of the phenomenal missions they had completed in their first and second years. What I had done wasn't much different from how the academy functioned. Instructors and professors already assigned missions based on cadet ranks. But by completely locking out everyone below the top 100, I was making one thing clear. If they didn't get stronger, they would become irrelevant. I let them simmer in that thought before continuing. Is it unfair? Yes. But that's the point. Since you all love joining collectives and forming factions to look down on each other, I figured you'd enjoy this. Oh, and in case you doubt me, I can do it. I can do whatever the fuck I want. I lingered for a second before explaining, aces have full authority over their batch. Even the professors can't intervene. The only ones who can override me are the two aces above me. Second-year ace, Arav. And third-year ace, Vereshia. I lifted my arm again and pointed at a section of the arena, at a silver-haired beauty lounging lazily on the VIP balcony. Vereshia Morrigan. The crowd followed my finger as I gave her an excited wave. She rolled her crimson eyes before bobbing her head a slow, deliberate nod. Murmurs turned into gasps. Some stiffened, others gritted their teeth, but no retorts were heard again. I dropped my hand and beamed. So, my fellow cadets, become strong. If you don't, you'll be left behind. I won't tolerate weakness in my batch. Try coming at me if you wish, but you'll be trampled just like the fools today. With that, I started walking toward the medical room, limping slightly because of my left leg. But after a few steps, I stopped. Then, without looking back, I pointed at another section of the field. More precisely, at 3 people. To Willem, who was watching the whole thing go down with mild amusement. To Alice, who rested her chin on her palm and looked on with calculating eyes. And to Talia, who seemed like she was barely restraining herself. I smirked. Oh, and, you three are next. I didn't need to elaborate. They understood my declaration. Next to get trampled. 153. Juliana's plan was nearly flawless. For weeks, she had been subtly manipulating both the noble and commoner factions, igniting conflicts just big enough to keep the tension high between them. Her goal was simple. She wanted to drag Samael into the mess. As the ace, he would inevitably have to step in to put an end to the faction war. She knew that. So, she created such a situation. Well, to be fair, the faction war was inevitable. It would have happened regardless of her involvement. She merely sped things up. And as soon as Samael returned from his mission, she escalated the conflicts between the factions, pushing both sides to the brink of an all-out war. Why? Because she needed to keep Samael, and the rest of the first-year batch, distracted. Of course, simply having the ace resolve a faction war or two wouldn't be enough to warrant everyone's attention. So, she had prepared a few more distractions. Ironically, she didn't need them in the end. Samael, in his usual fashion, dramatically challenged some of the strongest cadets to an all-versus-one match, drawing the attention of nearly the entire academy. As a result, the timeline of her own plan moved up as well. Originally she wanted to make her move a couple of weeks later, but an opportunity presented itself today. And she wasn't about to let it slip. As soon as she heard what Samael had done, she approached her pawn, Rexard Cronwell, and told him they were acting today. And, wrapped around her little finger like he was, Rexard agreed without hesitation. Their plan was straightforward. Juliana needed to sneak into the main clinic of the Healers Society to steal an item, or rather, a creature. Normally, Rexard would have handled this on his own, but despite being a genius alchemist, he didn't have the clearance to take whatever he wanted from the academy clinics. Especially something as dangerous as what Juliana was after. So, she was going to do it herself. Navigating through the nearly empty streets of Academy City, she made her way to the main clinic building of the Healers Society. From the outside, it looked no different than a small hospital. But in reality, it housed some of the Academy's best healers, or at least, it was supposed to. Right now, however, the building was mostly vacant. Most of the medical staff had been deployed to the training arena for the ongoing match. On top of that, nearly the entire second-year batch was away on a mission to Ishtara. So their healers weren't present either. In short, half of the third years were on mid-care duty for Samael's match, most of the first years were watching that very match, and the second years were away. This was the best time for her to execute her heist. At the moment, there was no one in the main clinic of the Healers Society, save for a few first years attending practical lessons, a couple of third years who had stayed behind, and one last obstacle. The head instructor Naomi Young. The Academy's best healer. But Juliana had crafted a plan to deal with them as well. Boom! In the far distance, at the opposite end of Academy City, a huge explosion shattered the rather peaceful evening. A plume of smoke rose into the sky, followed by the frantic blare of alarm sirens. The sound of shouting and hurried footsteps filled the formerly empty streets. Right on schedule, Juliana allowed herself a small smile. Then, she summoned a card she had taken from Rexard. It materialized over her head and turned her invisible. That explosion wasn't random. It came from the main alchemist lab. It wasn't anything major, and definitely not as dangerous as it looked. It was just big enough to cause a commotion and divert attention away from the clinic. And just as she planned, in no time at all, the remaining third years and any available medical staff began rushing toward the scene, leaving the main clinic even more vulnerable. It was a perfect distraction. A tanned woman, seemingly in her late 20s, emerged from the building as well. Her light copper eyes locked onto the horizon, gazing at the rising smoke in the distance. Then, she sighed, her feet lifted off the ground in the next moment and she flew away toward the commotion. That was Naomi. Under normal circumstances, she wouldn't have moved herself. But since this explosion came from the alchemy lab's direction, she decided to check it out herself. Just what Juliana wanted. With the small smile still intact on her Merlot lips, she waited a few minutes before casually striding into the main clinic using the front entrance. Since her invisibility card was only a common grade 1, anyone of the third year, let alone Naomi the head instructor herself, could have easily spotted her. So, she had to clear them out first. Now that the building was only full of first years like her, no one was able to detect her invisible figure even as she walked right past them. Not even 5 minutes later, she was standing at the entrance of the basement. And, of course, there was a passcode lock on the doors, only accessible to a select few in the Healers' Society. Juliana shook her head and pulled a small slip of paper from her jacket's inner pocket. Written on that slip of paper were 10 digits. It was the passcode she needed to unlock these doors. Getting it was easy. She had simply blackmailed a first-year boy working here, politely asking him to spy and bring her the code. Her smile curled into a satisfied smirk as she keyed in the numbers. A soft beep echoed. Then, with a hiss, the steel doors of the main clinic basement slid open. Without wasting a breath, she walked in. The basement was dimly lit, and the air was thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic. Rows of medical cabinets and storage units lined the walls. The contents inside them were nearly labeled: herbs, potions, bandages, and experimental concoctions that were likely off-limits to ordinary cadets. Juliana moved quickly but carefully. Her footsteps were light against the tiled floor as she kept an eye out for her target. What she wanted wasn't on the shelves of medicine, it was deeper inside. And soon enough, she found it. At the far end of the room, there was a transparent shelving unit that stood apart from the rest. Unlike the sterile medical cabinets, this one had actual miniature gardens flourishing inside it. Stay tuned for updates on my virtual library empire. There were tiny patches of moss, grass, and flowering herbs growing in carefully controlled environments. Juliana's cold eyes swept over the neatly arranged compartments until they landed on a small, enclosed section labeled, Syrphid slugs. Found it. She slid the glass panel open and felt the humid air waft out, tinged with a faint earthy scent. Delicate blades of grass swayed under an unseen current, and nestled among them was what she came here for, several translucent slug-like creatures. Barely keeping her excitement in check, she reached in and pinched one of the slugs between her fingers. It twitched but didn't resist, its gelatinous form cool and slightly sticky against her skin. This wasn't an ordinary medical specimen. Syrphid slugs were a rare type of infant spirit beasts, bred for one purpose: temporary nerve suppression. A single application to the skin could induce localized numbness, making them a favored tool in both medicine and, less legal pursuits. In fact, even now, Juliana's fingers had already gone numb. And she hadn't been holding them for more than a few seconds. But they had one other purpose that not many knew about. In alchemy, they could be used to create a deadly blood poison. And that was exactly what she needed this creature for. Tucking it into a small glass vial, Juliana secured it inside her jacket and shut the shelf. That was the easy part. Now, she just had to leave before anyone realized she'd ever been here. 30 minutes. That was all it took for Juliana to get in and out. Shortly after that, Samael's match had ended as well. By the next day, everything went back to normal like nothing ever happened. Well, sort of. Samael's new rule had thrown the whole first-year batch into chaos, but Juliana didn't care one bit about it. Because now, she was one step closer to her goal. Actually, she was just one step away from it as well. Just a bit more, she told herself, unable to keep the joy from seeping into her tone. Just a bit more, and freedom would be hers. Smiling, she made her way toward the alchemy lab. Since today was a day off with no mandatory classes, Juliana kept her outfit simple, an off-shoulder red top paired with black jeggings. Yet, as always, she looked effortlessly beautiful. Her short white hair, soft as untouched snow, framed her face in gentle waves. But it was azure blue eyes that held an inescapable charm, one that made people stop, stare, and forget whatever they were doing. She ignored the attention like always and kept walking. Was it annoying? Sure. But did it still please her? Absolutely. Beauty was just a tool, after all. Just like everything else. She soon reached the lab and stepped inside, shutting the doors behind her. But the sight before her gave her pause. The entire place was wrecked. Walls charred black with soot, glass crunching underfoot, the acrid scent of smoke still clinging to the air. The once pristine alchemy lab was now a scorched ruin. Juliana exhaled softly. Wow, I knew I asked you to blow up the place, but this might be overkill. A hand touched her bare shoulder. She turned, and met a pair of light hazel eyes staring back at her with a look she absolutely despised. Yet, she kept her smile soft. It was Rexard, tall, handsome, and as insufferable as ever. He flashed her a charming grin and leaned in close until his breath was warm against her ear. Anything for you, my love. Juliana almost wanted to gag. Instead, she lowered her gaze, letting a delicate blush creep onto her cheeks, shy, flustered, and utterly convincing. Rexard's grin widened at the sight. His hand on her shoulder began to knead gently, fingers trailing toward her neck. His other arm slid around her waist. And he leaned in even closer until his lips were inches away from hers. Juliana turned her face away at the very last second, pretending to blush even harder. Her voice came out meek and hesitant in the next moment, "And no, I told you, you can't have me until I'm free." Rexard's grin didn't waver. If anything, it grew more amused. "Oh, but you are free, my love," he murmured, fingers tracing the curve of her neck. "You just don't realize it yet." Juliana swallowed back the bile rising in her throat. Once again, she pretended to act shy and lowered her gaze, playing the role he expected. The role of a demure girl, shy and hesitant. She bit her lip and shifted slightly in his suffocating hold. "Not yet," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not until I have nothing holding me back." Rexard chuckled, his breath warm against her skin. "And when that day comes?" Juliana forced a shaky smile. "Then, I'll be yours." It was a lie, of course. A beautifully wrapped one. But Rexard was a fool, and like every fool, he believed what he wanted to believe. Satisfied, he finally released her, stepping back with a cocky smirk. "Then I'll wait," he said, as if he had a choice. Juliana let out a small, relieved sigh, one that wasn't entirely fake. "What's next?" she asked. Rexard scoffed and turned away. "That master of yours has made our job laughably easy. We're at the final stretch now. All that's left is for you to get his blood. And then," Juliana tilted her head, feigning curiosity. Rexard chuckled. "Then, just as you said, you'll be mine." Juliana let out a soft, playful giggle. Too soft, too playful. He laughed because he thought he'd already won. She laughed at him. No matter how insufferable, Rexard was a tool. Like everything else. And once he outlived his usefulness, he'd be discarded just the same. Chapter 154. Sudden transformation of a minor villain. It took me a full day of rest and some light medical treatment from the third-year healers to completely recover. My wounds were healed, leaving no scars behind. My body was in near-perfect condition, though my back still ached from time to time. The healers assured me that this discomfort would fade in a day or two, which was to be expected since I had been stabbed too deeply near my spine. I also noticed a bit of weakness in my left leg when I walked, but they told me that would also return to normal soon. I couldn't overstate how thankful I was for the medical advancements in this fantasy world since I was too young to be dealing with back and leg issues. I also heard a flying rumor that while I was in the midst of my match, there was a huge explosion in the Alchemist Society's main lab. Although no one was injured, there was a large fire. Was it a coincidence that it happened right when my match was going on? Of course not. Juliana had made her move. If my guess was correct, she must have gotten what she needed to remove the bloodworm from her body. And the last thing she required was my blood. I let a small smile creep up on my face. Immediately, I heard a passive voice, lost of all emotions, reach me from my side. "Why are you so happy, young master?" I turned my head and saw a beautiful young woman walking beside me, holding a large duffel bag in her hands. With hair as white as freshly fallen snow and sharp eyes the color of a frozen deep sea, she looked as if she stepped out of a winter's dream, untouchable, elegant, and utterly bewitching. "Juliana, my dear shadow." I spared her a short glance and shook my head with a chuckle. "Happy? No, I wouldn't go that far. Just amused." Her icy gaze remained fixed on me, her face as unreadable as ever. Amused by what? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let my smile linger and looked up at the evening sky. "Just thinking about how things are falling into place," I mused. Then, after a bit of silence, "Hey, Julie. Do you think people are defined by their choices or by their circumstances?" Juliana shot me a confused look, one of the rare instances of a genuine emotion slipping onto her face. "Huh, why do you ask me that?" I shrugged. "Just a thought. It's something I find myself thinking about a lot lately. And you're smart. You've always been smart, haven't you? Even when we were kids. So, I thought I'd ask for your opinion." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Flattering me doesn't suit you, young master." I laughed. "Maybe not, but that doesn't mean it's not true." Juliana fell silent, her gaze turning distant as she mulled over my question. Finally, she replied in a tone softer than usual, "People like to believe they're defined by their choices. It's comforting, after all. It makes them think they have control." I raised an eyebrow. "And you don't think they do?" She exhaled softly, shifting the duffel bag in her grip. Most don't. They just follow the path carved out for them, shaped by things they had no say in, their birth, their family, their circumstances. What they call choice is just a reaction to what was already set in motion. I watched her carefully. So, you're saying people are just prisoners of their circumstances? Of what? Fate? Destiny? That sounds more like resignation than philosophy. Fate is philosophy, Juliana responded instantly, her expression becoming unreadable once more. But no, what I'm saying is that only a few ever get the chance to break free. To achieve true freedom. Something in her tone made my smile widen. How poetic, I mused. So tell me, Julie, if someone were to break free, what do you think would happen? Her gaze met mine then, steady and cold. That depends on what they're willing to do to make sure they never get chained again. Whoa, what was that, a declaration? I chuckled, shoving my hands into my pockets. That doesn't sound like freedom. Juliana frowned, caught off guard. What? I kept my tone light but pointed as I explained, if you have to keep fighting, keep paying the price to stay free, then are you really free? Isn't the pursuit of such freedom just another form of enslavement? Her eyes widened for just a flicker. She then looked away, and a whisper escaped her lips. What do you even know? Huh, I inclined my head. She sighed. I said you'd know best, young master. Silence washed over us as we continued walking. The streets of Academy City buzzed with activity, as usual. Wherever we passed, people turned their attention toward us. I'd love to say they were staring at Juliana, maybe admiring her cold, deadly charm, but that would be a lie. No, since this district was mostly occupied by first years, every single one of them was glaring daggers at me like I'd personally slapped their grandmothers. Man, they really hate me now. I tried to be mature about it. Really, I did, but in the end, I couldn't resist flashing them a wide, shamefully smug smile as I strolled past. Predictably, this only made things worse. A few cadets outright gasped, some even started whispering curses, not loud enough to be called out, but just enough for me to hear. Juliana sighed beside me. Could you please stop throwing oil into the fire, young master? I laughed the kind of laugh a child makes when he discovers a new way to annoy everyone around him. But it's fun. She shook her head. Where are we going, anyway? Why do you ask? I frowned in response. Juliana gave me a flat look. Because I'm carrying a bag that weighs as much as a full-grown man's dead body. What's inside it, anyway? What's in it doesn't concern you. We're going to Michael's place, I replied, my frown turning into a scowl. And why is a dead body your standard unit of measurement? What's wrong with you? She completely ignored my last question and looked at me with mild surprise. Michael, God's will. I narrowed my eyes at her. How many more Michaels are there? I was surprised when she answered. There are 16 in the first-year batch alone, she said. I blinked in disbelief. Wait, that many? And how do you know that? It seems to be a common name, she explained, rolling her shoulders. As for how I know, I'm familiar with everyone in our batch. Everyone, I exclaimed. You know every single person in our batch. She nodded confidently. I immediately pointed to a random guy sitting at an open cafe with a girl. What's that guy's name, then? Michael Krebs, believe it or not, she said, managing a small smile. I palmed my face, massaging my eyebrows in exasperation. And maybe it was because I wasn't paying attention to the road that I ended up bumping into someone. Ah, sorry about that, I said instinctively, only to feel a sudden force shoving me back. It was strong enough to send a normal person flying. But after how much my circulation technique has enhanced my body, all it managed to do was push me a single step back. A flicker of irritation sparked on my face as I looked up. Hey, man, I said sorry, but the rest of my words died in my throat and my eyes shot wide. Standing before me was an emerald-haired young man, his face twisted in unrestrained fury. His eyes, gleaming like morning dew on fresh moss, burned as they locked onto mine. He was nearly as tall as me. A little chubby, but beneath the plain white tee he wore, I could see the unmistakable outline of muscle rippling under the fat. Jake. The name barely left my lips. Yeah, that was definitely Jake. What the hell happened to him? He looked so different. He was still fat but somehow shredded at the same time. And his eyes were sharper, more confident. Not arrogant. His whole presence carried a new edge. Damn, man, you lost weight. Send me your diet, I said, nonchalantly flashing a polite smile as I tried stepping past him. But, shut up, he spat and moved. To block my path. Huh, I blinked at him, halting in my tracks. Shut your rambling, he snapped in a voice full of venom. And watch where you're walking. Or do you need help with that? Before I could react to his words, his hand shot toward my face. I didn't move, didn't even flinch, just stood there calmly. Before his fingers got anywhere close to me, a cold blade kissed the side of his throat, sharp enough to draw a bead of blood. Jake froze. His eyes trembled for a split second before snapping to the side. In less than a breath, Juliana had repositioned to Jake's left, drawn a kunai, and pressed its tip against his neck. Let's not cause a scene, she murmured, her voice laced with warning. Don't forget, both your rank and status are far beneath the man you're trying to threaten. Jake stilled. Then, without warning, he swung in an attempt to grab her. But Juliana had already moved. She effortlessly stepped back, just beyond his reach. He stilled again, surprised by Juliana's reaction time despite how angry he was, before pointing a finger at her. Stay out of this. Then he turned to me. And you, I'll deal with you soon. With those friendly parting words, he stormed off. Juliana walked up to me and picked up the duffel bag she'd dropped earlier. What the hell happened to that pig? I let out a mock gasp. Julie, don't say that. It's so offensive, to pigs. She didn't laugh. Of course she didn't laugh. Just turned and started walking. I followed with a forced chuckle. But even as I kept up the jokes, my mind was caught up in a storm. What the hell? What happened to Jake? Suddenly, a dark thought surfaced in my head, one I didn't want to acknowledge. That strength he showed, that sudden transformation, those are not things you could have achieved out of nowhere. Unless, could it be, he found the summoning card of Asmodeus? And no, that's impossible, but is it? Because only that explanation made sense. Fuck, I needed to find out. Good thing I was headed to the archives anyway. Chapter 155, Archives I. After arriving at Michael's front door, I had Juliana drop off the duffel bag and sent her away. She was more than happy to be dismissed and didn't ask any follow-up questions. Once she walked off, I rang the doorbell. After a few seconds, I rang it again. Then again, and again. Finally, the door swung open and Michael appeared to answer. Oh my god, can you wait a few seconds like a normal person? I did, I replied flatly. For 5 seconds, Michael exclaimed. Yes, I said, shoving him aside as I stepped into his apartment. I'm a busy man, Michael. I waited 5 seconds for you, and that's the time I'll never get back in life. Michael gave me a deadpan look, though his eyes twisted as if he was experiencing physical pain from my existence. Yes, you boy genius. That's how time works. I rolled my eyes and pointed to the duffel bag at his feet without looking back, continuing further inside. Anyway, grab that bag. Hey, I didn't invite you in. Michael stuttered before quickly picking up the bag and following me into his own home. I came to stand in his hallway, if it could even be called that, and looked around. The layout of his rooms was rather simple. A foyer opened up into a small drawing room that connected to a kitchen on the left and a laundry room on the right. 2 rooms, 1 bedroom and 1 spare, were attached to the hallway at the other end. And, yeah, that was it. Moreover, his rooms were so plain that it bordered on depressing. Bare walls, no curtains, and a bed frame without a mattress in his bedroom. It looked more like a prison cell than a living space. Nice place, I remarked. Scanning the barren wasteland he called home. Very cozy. Has the vibe of a man who spends his nights watching conspiracy documentaries and arguing with the screen. I expected a snarky comeback. Maybe even an insult. But he said nothing. Frowning, I turned to see Michael hunched over the center table, where he had placed the duffel bag and unzipped it. Inside it were hundreds of small glowing crystals that bathed his face in a prismatic light, and illuminated the terrifying expression he was making. His mouth had stretched into a smile so wide it should have been physically impossible. His eyes glowed with unholy fervor, like a man seeing the face of God for the first time. I flinched back in horror, pointing at him as if accusing him of war crimes. Why the fuck are you making that face? Michael turned to me, his grin impossibly widening even further. Oh, it's just. I've never seen so much money in one place. Regardless, I snapped. Stop smiling like that, it's creepy. You look like you're possessed by a demon or something. Michael paused, then let out a knowing chuckle. Which somehow made it worse, because as I knew, he actually was possessed by a demon. Shaking off that ungodly grin, he gestured around his place with a casual shrug. Apologies. As you can clearly see, I've been broke for so long that seeing this much money threw me off. I wrinkled my nose in disgust. But how the hell are you even broke? You're ranked 4th. You get a 60% discount on literally everything. Yeah, Michael nodded helplessly and pulled out the empty pockets of his pants. But discounts don't mean much when you don't have a dime to begin with. I dragged a hand down my face. Okay, what about all the other perks? The top 10 get exclusive services and monthly cred rewards. What happened to all that? Oh, that. He scratched the back of his head. You see, before I came to the academy, I had to buy a few weapons. One artificer I met was nice enough to sell them to me for a third of the price. Now that I'm making money, I'm paying him back as fast as I can. I stared at him, then threw my hands up. Are you insane? He was dumb enough to trust you, just take advantage of it. Don't pay him back. Ghost him. Michael narrowed his eyes, looking genuinely offended by that completely normal suggestion. No, he showed me goodwill, and I won't throw it back in his face. That is just wrong. Quote. I stared at him dumbly. This fool. Ag, right, I remember something like this happening in the game as well. If I recall correctly, it wasn't just the artificer. He was also sending small relief funds to orphanages destroyed in Ishtara recently. Pinching the bridge of my nose, I let out a sharp breath. I'd bet my life he wouldn't keep a single coin from all those essence stones either. He'd use them on creating potions, crafting items, and leveling up his soul rank, then he'd sell the rest and give away the money. It worked out in the game because he was the ace. He could afford to help everyone and still get everything he needed for free from the academy. But here, in this reality, he couldn't. He wasn't the ace. I was. And yet, he was still doing it anyway. What a saint. What a complete idiot. Shouldn't you take care of yourself before worrying about others? I could never understand people like him. I wished I could. I wished I was half as selfless. But in my eyes, what he was doing wasn't generosity. It was plain foolishness. And maybe I was projecting a little, but I found it dumb enough to hate it. Arg, whatever. I waved a hand dismissively and turned on my heel. There are 2,000 essence stones in that bag. Count them. They have a legal paper trace, so don't worry about anyone accusing you of anything illegal. If the instructors ask how you got them when you level up, just say you won them from me in a bet or something. Michael frowned. That doesn't sound like a very believable lie. I shot him an amused look. Lies don't need to be believable. They need to be flawless. If no one can poke a hole in your story, they can't question it. And if they can't question it, they have no choice but to accept it. The black-haired boy gave me his second deadpan look of the day. That's just a fancy way of saying, lie with confidence, isn't it? I smirked. Exactly. Now then, let's head to the archives. The archives, that was the name given to the Academy's library. It was one of the largest physical libraries in the two realms, housing billions of books, trillions of storage drives, and countless other things. A place where knowledge was never lost and curiosity was always rewarded. That was how the world spoke of Apex Academy's archives. Some even claimed that if you knew the right places to look, you'd always find the answer to any question, or at least a trail leading to it. Now, I didn't believe in legends or fairy tales, but I did know that most of what was said about the archives was true. And today, I had two objectives to complete there. First, I needed to locate an artifact called the Key of Order. Second, I had to confirm whether the summoning card of Asmodeus was still hidden there within the archives. If it wasn't, then it had likely been claimed by Jake. And that would be a nightmare to deal with. Although the possibility was far-fetched, I couldn't ignore it without investigating. Jake had more than enough hatred for both Michael and me to fuel his desire for power and revenge, just like Samael did in the game. If that was the case, Asmodeus could have already drawn him in, luring him with a false promise of power and fame and women and whatnot. And even though I didn't show it, just the thought of that scenario gave me a headache. Asmodeus was a sinister deity who had lived for thousands of years, serving both as an ally and a son to the false god, the Spirit King, in his conquest of worlds. As the seventh demon prince, his power and experience far surpassed the sinistrous entity sealed within Michael's demonic sword, the sixth demon prince, Zaldrith. Dealing with the holder of Asmodeus' summoning card wasn't going to be easy. Worse, he had more knowledge to offer his summoner than even Zaldrith did. In simple terms, if given enough time, he could turn even a random nobody into a powerhouse stronger than the protagonist before taking over their body entirely. I could deal with Michael's demon whenever I wanted. I had leverage over Zaldrith. Something that I could use to strike a deal with him. But Asmodeus, oh, no, his domain was lust and desire. I had no way to shield my feeble mortal mind from his profane temptations. Also, if I ever became a threat to him, I had no doubt Asmodeus could have me submitting to him in a heartbeat. So, I couldn't deal with him directly. Hell, I couldn't even allow him to become a threat. If I confirmed Jake had claimed the card of Asmodeus, I'd have no choice but to kill him as soon as possible. Arg, I groaned, rubbing my face. I already had way too many problems piling up in the future, and the last thing I needed was to deal with an ancient demonic deity on top of it. What? Michael's ears perked up from the seat beside me. We were on an Airbus, traveling from the main island to the archives. I raised an eyebrow. What? You just groaned, he said. You weren't even listening to me, were you? I paused. Ah, were you saying something? Michael stared at me, then flashed a dangerous smile that all but radiated dwindling patience. I just listed the names of 30 books I wanted. You didn't hear a single one, did you? Oh, right, I also needed to grab a few books for this guy. It was one of the conditions of our deal. Right, I smiled back. Can you name them all again? Alphabetical order this time. Chapter 156, Archives 2. The Archive Island was as big as a small city. It was built in the shape of a dome. Its surface gleamed with interwoven veins of spirit-forged metal and enchanted glass. At a distance, it looked less like a library and more like a celestial observatory. Like a monument to knowledge standing at the edge of the sky. Calling it beautiful would be an understatement. The Airbus landed at the edge of the island and we disembarked it. The entrance to the archives was as grand as one would expect of a place holding so much knowledge it would take an ordinary person more than 3 lifetimes to go through it all. Twin obsidian gates towered over us. Their dark surface was engraved with shimmering silver runes, shining as brightly as stars in the night sky. 4 awakened were standing guard there. They asked for our identity, we gave it, and they permitted us entry in under a few minutes. We passed through the gates into a massive archway and saw something etched onto its ceiling in a foreign language. It read, Alfie, Alam fi nafas wahid. Mala and al hayat fi kutwa wahida. Michael, who was even more awestruck by all the grandeur, frowned while walking beside me. He pointed up with his chin and asked, what does that mean? I shrugged. If my translation is correct, then, 1,000 worlds in a single breath. 1,000,000 lives in a single step. That sounds poetic, Michael commented. What language is that? Arabic, I answered, one of the Old World's languages from which the current southern tongue, Sonli, is derived. And how do you know that? He asked with a frown. I rolled my shoulders again. I studied it as an elective in high school. Oh, I didn't know you were interested in Southern culture, he said. I'm not, I shook my head. Some of the girls in that class were just really hot. Michael shot me a glare. Weren't you with Lily in high school? I threw my hands up. Hey, don't accuse me of anything. I just flirted here and there, and didn't actually cheat. Unlike a certain someone, Michael scowled. Flirting while in a relationship is emotional cheating, you immoral bastard. I scoffed loudly. Ha. Sounds exactly like something a cheater would say. What? Michael's scowl deepened. I wasn't even the one who did it. You were an accomplice, I pointed out. And that makes you just as bad. Michael's mouth opened and closed a few times, struggling to come up with words. Then, well, you were a bully. That makes you like 100 times worse. I narrowed my eyes at him. Okay, Michael, you know what? I never even touched you until you kissed my girlfriend. So, whatever I did to you after that, you brought it upon yourself. Michael smirked like he had finally cornered me. You're right, you never bullied me yourself until that day. But you were an accomplice. And as I've recently come to realize, that makes you just as bad. Quote. I blinked. Okay, damn, for the first time in a while, I didn't have a retort ready to fire back at him. So, and I'm not proud of it, I resorted to cursing him. Shut the fuck up, you loser, I laughed. Your face looks like a burnt turkey someone forgot to throw out. Waha, what? Is that supposed to be an insult? No, why would I need to insult someone whose whole existence is already a joke? Okay, what the fuck? Unluckily, before our verbal scuffle could turn physical, a sharp voice cut through our banter. You two, enough. This place is a library. Keep your voices down. We flinched and looked up. Apparently, we had reached the front counter and hadn't noticed. The archivist sitting behind the counter had to yell at us to end our back and forth. He was a jacked man in his early 20s, tall with a chiseled face and more muscles than enthusiasm about his job. But as soon as his gaze landed on me, his stern face softened, then suddenly brightened up. "Oh, look, if it isn't the golden boy himself," he chirped with an unmistakable expression of joy. I furrowed my brows slightly. "Do I know you?" Suddenly, the look of joy froze on the man's face, his mouth left hanging open. After a short pause, he said, "You don't remember." I didn't know my face was this forgettable. I quickly waved my hands. No, it's not you. It's me. I have the memory of a goldfish." That seemed to give him some relief as he said, "Well, you met me during the evaluation exam. I gave you your orb belt and you claimed you never lost a fight." My frown hardened. That did sound like something I would boast about myself. And now that I gave him another look, he did seem familiar. He was one of the first faculty members I met. "Ah, yes, now I recall," I nodded. "Right," he smiled widely and officially introduced himself. "I'm Damien No Name." "Oh, a no name." Bastards or nobility who weren't acknowledged and adopted by their families were given this last name. They weren't accepted in aristocratic society. They were also not fully accepted among commoners. As such, they belonged nowhere. And they were called no-names. Of course, their situation was different if they were awakened. Because hunters were accepted everywhere, irrespective of their background and personal history. They were modern-day celebrities. Heroes. And from the looks of it, this guy was a strong hunter. I nodded. "Well, you already know me," I said before gesturing toward the protagonist accompanying me. "And this dimwit here is Michael Godswill." Michael clenched his jaw, clearly biting back a retort, while Damien chuckled. "Oh, I know both of you. What your squad pulled off in Istara is being talked about all over the world. The Academy is still figuring out how to reward you," he said, before turning to me with an amused glint in his eyes. "Especially you, Samael, you've been making headlines non-stop these past few months. Get ready for a thorough Q&A at tomorrow's press conference." I was about to brush off his comment with a polite smile when something he said hit me like a slap to the face. "Tomorrow's press conference? What press conference?" I snapped my head toward Michael. "What the hell is he talking about?" Michael gave me a flat look. "You haven't heard. The Academy is awarding us medals of bravery and a hefty sum of credits tomorrow. Maybe even something else. They're holding a press conference in our honor." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I exhaled sharply. "And no one thought to tell me?" Michael shrugged. "Figured you knew. It's been the talk of the Academy for days. Also, we received a text from the Academy on our communicators." I groaned. "Ah, I see. I have the Academy's account blocked." Both Damien and Michael practically dropped their jaws and exclaimed in unison, "What?" I sighed. "They send too many spam messages. Like why am I not attending classes and all that?" "Dude," Damien laughed. "I'm in the faculty and even I'm not gutsy enough to do that. Pray no instructors find out about it." Ignoring him, I turned back to Michael. "Who's going to be there?" "One of the venerables, a few high-ranking officials, and some big-name hunters and sponsors. And the press, obviously." He gave me a sideways glance. "It's a big deal. So, try not to look like you want to kill someone on stage." I grunted, running a hand down my face. The press was going to have a field day with this. I could already guess they were going to take a dig at my past. Those vultures were always hunting for drama. If they couldn't find any, they'd create it. And when it came to me, they had 1,000 different ways to poke and prod, all in the hopes of getting a reaction. I didn't have a very clean history, after all. My reputation was as muddy as a back alley gutter after a downpour. The last thing I needed was to stand in front of flashing cameras and deal with annoying reporters while the Academy paraded me around like a prized show dog. A medal and some credits were nice, but not at the cost of a public spectacle. Maybe I'd just skip it. "Oh, and don't even think about skipping it," Damien said as if reading my mind. "The last cadet who tried that never heard the end of it from the venerables." I clicked my tongue. "Damn it." Damien just laughed at my expense. "Anyway, how can I help? What books are you guys looking for?" The Apex Archives. Aside from being the size of a small city, it was built like one too. Past the front counter, wide streets branched out into different sections of the library. These streets were flanked by tall, square-shaped structures. Their walls, lined with shelves, cradled countless books and tomes. These buildings were called reading rooms. You could pluck a book straight from their walls and step inside to read in silence. But this was just the outer district. As we ventured deeper, the scenery changed. We saw towering spires of enchanted glass and dark stone, housing rarer texts and ancient scriptures. Further still, nestled in the heart of this city of knowledge, were the restricted vaults, sealed chambers accessible only to either one of the aces or graduates. And all of this was only the first floor. Oh, yeah, there were multiple floors. Scattered stairways here and there or spires could be used to ascend to the upper levels, where even more texts, memory stones, and who knew what else were stored. If there was one problem, it was that this place was very dark. There were some street lamps placed along the streets that softly illuminated the surroundings. Yet, it was as dark as night here. We had to carry our own torches to see properly. Regardless, I had to admit, this place was impressive. But I wasn't here for books. Not primarily, at least. I had 2 tasks to complete. And first, I needed to find the Key of Order. 157 choices. The Key of Order, as its name suggested, was a key, one of many enchanted items bound to and found on the Ascent Isles. Despite their modern architecture, the Ascent Isles were a place of countless mystery and wonder. The creators of the Apex Academy, the first Grand Masters, left behind numerous secrets and constructed places of unnatural phenomena. For example, there were many rooms on the Ascent Isles that could move. Like actually move through space. Their positions change constantly, making it impossible for someone to get inside directly. These were known as dimensional chambers. The only way to enter them was to rush inside the moment someone was exiting. Another fascinating place was the Hall of Echoes, where you could hear every conversation that had ever taken place on the Ascent Isles, as long as you were a part of them. The Stairwell of Paradox was one more anomaly. No matter how far you climbed, you'd always end up on the same floor, unless you knew the trick to escape its loop, which was to jump out of the windows. Then there was the ever-watching mirror. It reflected not just your image but also glimpses of your past and future selves, although never in the order you might expect. There were many other such things, like the Slate of 10 Commandments, the reverse time candle, the bridge that leads nowhere, or the coin of certain loss. But perhaps the strangest of them all was the Scholar's End, a room that did not exist until you realized you were already inside it. I had never encountered the last one even in the game. And one particularly intriguing relic was what I had set out to find right now, the Key of Order. It was a simple bronze key that could be inserted into any door, and if there was no keyhole, one would just magically appear. When you twisted the key and opened the door, you could exit to any room on the Ascent Isles, as long as you had an image of the desired room in your mind. Cool, right, of course. But there was a problem. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to remember exactly where the damn key was. Fuck my goldfish memory. I knew Michael had found it in one of the restricted vaults in the archives that was accessible only to an ace. He'd been searching for anything that might lead him to the truth about his parents' disappearance. Logs, documents, research papers, anything that could help him understand the death zone where his parents vanished. And in one of those vaults, he found that key. It wasn't a coincidence. Well, not entirely. You see, the Key of Order wasn't some one-of-a-kind relic. In fact, there were 12 of them. 3 were in the hands of selected faculty members. The rest belonged to senior cadets, specifically, those who were part of a secret society known as the Order of 12. The Order was a covert faction within the Academy. It wasn't very different from a collective in its function, but their goals couldn't be more different. They didn't waste time on trivial things like enforcing their superiority or discrimination. Instead, they focused on growing stronger, studying and sharing forbidden knowledge, subtly manipulating Academy politics from the shadows, and carrying out the wills of the Grand Masters. So how do you join them? You don't. If you have undeniable proof of the Order's existence, then you're either already part of it, or you're someone who was never supposed to know. Each year, when the third years graduate, those who had been part of the Order hide their keys throughout the Ascent Isles. A freshman who finds a key is granted the right to know about them, to learn about the Order, and to become one of them. And only those in possession of one of the 12 keys could join, hence the name, Key of Order. It wasn't just a requirement. It was a necessity. Why? Because the Order's base of operations was located on Crown Island, a smaller island floating right above the main island, directly over the Apex Tower. Getting there was nearly impossible unless you had some means of teleportation because the island was protected by its own force field bubble, separate from the rest of the Ascent Isles. Even the instructors and the Cadet Council weren't allowed there, let alone capable of reaching it. Well, whatever. None of that mattered to me. I wasn't going to join the Order. Joining them meant following their rules, and I wasn't the type to do as I was told. I just needed the key. My original plan was to get into every restricted vault that even vaguely resembled the one where Michael got the key in the game and search through them all. It would have taken time, at least a day or two. But fortunately, Michael had unknowingly made things easier for me. As part of our deal, he added a condition: I had to retrieve the books he needed from the archives. Which meant all I had to do was check the vaults containing those books. At least one of them was going to be the right one. And just like that, what would have taken a day's work turned into a few hours. Hey, aren't I a genius? After Michael listed all the documents and books he needed, Damien showed us a map of the first 2 floors of the archives and marked the areas where we'd find them. We started with the first floor. I used my golden badge to open the restricted vaults and took out every document Michael requested. It didn't take long to gather most of what we needed. And in none of those vaults did I find the key. Which meant it was time to move on to the second floor. But there was a tiny problem. You can't go in there, one of the guards said flatly to Michael. We had taken one of the spires to reach the second floor entrance, where 3 guards stood watch. One of them blocked Michael from stepping inside. Turns out, the entire second floor was reserved for second years. First years weren't allowed in, unless they were the ace. I shrugged. Bye-bye. Wait, Michael groaned and handed me a list. Just don't forget anything. And do you remember all the marked places Damien showed us on the map? I gave him an offended look. My memory's bad, but not that bad. I saw them just a few minutes ago, Michael. He shot me a skeptical look. Of course, he muttered. I'll be waiting in the reading room next to this building. Sure. I turned to leave but stopped midway. Oh, by the way, Michael. You once said you have an X-ray card on you, right? Mind lending it to me? He raised an eyebrow. Why? I shrugged and lied through my teeth. Might help me find your books faster. The second floor was nothing like the first. While the first floor was built like a city, this place actually looked like a library, if libraries were designed to be labyrinths. Towering bookshelves stretched endlessly, forming an intricate maze that was impossible to navigate at a glance. Sections were marked on the ceiling, but even here, it was so dark you wouldn't see a thing without a bright flashlight. Scattered throughout this maze were more restricted vaults. But as I passed, I noticed even rarer items like memory stones, scrolls of soul imprints, and storage drives. Memory stones were crystals capable of storing memories. By holding it in your hand, you could recall something in your head and the stone would record it. They were used for knowledge that couldn't properly be expressed in books. Scrolls of soul imprints, when activated, summoned an AI-like holographic projection of the person who had left their imprint. You could ask these holographic avatars questions, and they would answer to the best of their knowledge from when they were alive. And storage drives were, well, storage drives. Not everything was magic. Unlike the mostly empty first floor, the second floor was packed with second and third years. Mostly third years. Unlike us freshmen, the upperclassmen were already so serious about their studies and missions. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of torchlight flaring between the shelves or cadets jumping across them to navigate the maze. Now, I'm not proud to admit it, but I got lost within minutes. After some trial and error, and asking around, I also had to resort to jumping atop bookshelves to find my way. As I moved, I spotted flying tomes rearranging themselves, a quill scribbling on sheets of paper on its own, and a book that was literally whispering something in an unknown language. A cute senior girl, passing by advised me, if a book ever whispers to you, don't answer. I wholeheartedly agreed. Soon, I reached the section I wanted to go to. Once again, I used my badge to open the vaults and searched through them one by one. Aha, 821. After nearly 50 minutes of rummaging and cursing, I finally found it. Tucked behind a book, there it was. A bronze key, with a photograph attached to it. The photo showed a picture of what looked like an empty conference room with a large round table. Behind it, cursive writing read: You are chosen by us, cadet. The order welcomes you. Unlock a door using the key while imagining this room in your mind, and you'll achieve greatness. I scoffed. Achieve greatness. Yeah, right, it sounded like a recruitment pitch for a cult. Which, in a way, the order was. Shaking my head, I pocketed the photograph and took the bronze key in my hand. Then, I stepped toward the vault door, closed it, and held the key up to it. Immediately, a keyhole appeared on its smooth metallic surface. I focused and pictured a room in my mind, then twisted the key and swung the door open. Whoa, I was speechless. Beyond the door was a room filled with bookshelves, several couches and chairs, and a table at the center with a lamp glowing softly atop it. It was a reading room. The very same one where Samael had found the summoning card of Asmodeus in the game. This was another reason I needed the Key of Order. Aside from its importance to my long-term plans, I also needed it to find this specific reading room. The problem was, there were thousands of reading rooms scattered across the archives. The game never specified exactly which one Samael had entered where he found that card. I remembered its layout from the inside, but I had no clue where the reading room actually was. So I tried this. I used the key and imagined the reading room from the game. I wasn't sure it would work. After all, I had never seen the room in person, only on a screen. But, well, it worked. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, shutting the door behind me and cutting off its connection to the vault. Now, if I remembered correctly, the card was hidden inside one of the secret compartments in these shelves. But I wasn't about to go looking for it by hand. Because, as I might have said numerous times already, I wasn't confident I could resist Asmodeus' tempting whispers of power, revenge, fame, women, and God knows what else. So instead, I summoned a card I had borrowed from Michael earlier. And as soon as it manifested over my head, my eyes lit up, glowing softly like distant stars. My vision shifted. Immediately, I could see through objects. It wasn't quite X-ray vision, but it was exactly what I needed. I scanned the shelves, looking through the wood and paper, until there, I found a hidden compartment. And inside it, I scowled in confusion. It was, right there, the summoning card of Asmodeus. This is strange, I muttered, scratching my chin. I leaned in, eyes narrowing as I studied the rune markings on its surface. It was exactly the same as I remembered from the game. No doubt about it. For a second, I was tempted to pull it out, to inspect it more closely. But I crushed that thought before it could fully form. No, if I accidentally awakened the demon of lust, there was nothing I could do to protect myself from him. Arg, but then how? How did Jake achieve that much raw power? If he wasn't possessed by Asmodeus, what caused his sudden transformation? If it wasn't the demon of lust himself, then who was behind it? I guess, there were countless treasures and artifacts in this world capable of granting sudden power to someone, and while none came to my mind at the moment, it wasn't exactly improbable that Jake could have found one such treasure. I bit my lower lip. Just what the hell did he do? Never mind, if he hadn't made a deal with Asmodeus, then whatever was happening with him wasn't my concern. I'll let Michael deal with it. Yeah, that was the smart move. Jake's personal grudge for Michael was way bigger than his hatred for me, anyway. He'd go after him first. Besides, I had my own dear Shadow to worry about. With this Key of Order in my possession, I now had everything I needed to crush Juliana's plans and kill Rexard. I shot one last glance at the summoning card of Asmodeus, still safely hidden in its secret compartment. I'll deal with you soon, I murmured, then turned around and used the key to leave. Chapter 158, Choices 2. I barged into the reading room, barely holding two tall stacks of books and documents in my arms. The dim lighting didn't help. Nearly stumbling as I navigated through the shadows, I finally reached the table where Michael was seated and slammed the towering stacks down in front of him. "You're late," he commented, not bothering to look up from whatever he was reading under the soft glow of a desk lamp. "The second floor is a damn maze," I grumbled, collapsing into the chair across from him. "And why is the archive so dark? Every corner of this place is pitch black. I know the Academy is definitely rich enough to light up a place this big." Michael finally glanced up, lazily sliding the books I had bought for him toward himself. "You do realize this is a library and not a sunbathing lounge?" I scoffed. "That's still no excuse. There's not a single ceiling light in any of the reading rooms. The street lamps outside barely work, and the whole second floor is so shrouded in shadows you can't even see around the corners." He shrugged. "This place was built ages ago, during the dark times. They didn't have the resources or manpower to fully illuminate it back then, and now they can't risk a reconstruction project because the knowledge stored here is too valuable. Just use a flashlight." I threw up my hands. "That's not enough." I nearly tripped over a chair just trying to find this table. Michael hummed noncommittally, flipping through one of the documents. After a few moments, he raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Wow, you actually found everything on my list." "Of course," I said, grabbing a book from my own pile, the ones I'd brought for myself. He tilted his head. "What's that?" I waved a hand. "Just doing some research of my own." "Here." He narrowed his eyes. I shot him a pointed look. If you don't like it, feel free to find another reading room. I'm not wandering around in the dark again until it's time to leave. Michael sighed, shaking his head. You really have a problem with the dark, huh? I glared. No, I have a problem with ambush spots. Do you know how many horror stories start with, the library was eerily dark, and then? You do realize this is the academy, not a haunted mansion. He rolled his eyes. I pointed toward a random corner of the room, where the shadows seemed just a little darker than anywhere else. Tell that to whatever's lurking back there. Michael glanced at the spot, then shrugged. Pretty sure it's just a librarian taking a nap. I choked. You're joking. He smirked. Maybe. I narrowed my eyes but decided not to press further. If I started hearing breathing from the darkness, I was deploying my full soul arsenal and obliterating this damn place. After that, we fell into silence, drowning ourselves in research. What was I studying? Warlock marks. That day when we were on the plane to Ishtara, Celine Valkyrin looked at my tattoo and asked me if it was a warlock mark. That, in itself, wasn't so strange. But the way she looked when she posed that question definitely was. She looked shaken. I made a mental note then and there to find out exactly what a warlock mark was. Celine was going to be an enemy one day. A stupidly strong enemy. In the game, it had taken all the heroes at their prime to work together, a ridiculous amount of luck, and a well-planned ambush to defeat a weakened Celine. Honestly, if Juliana and Lily hadn't played crucial roles in that fight, Michael and Alexia wouldn't have been able to kill her. Celine was that strong. In fact, I'd say she was just as strong as my father, if not more. Definitely more, though. Regardless, she wasn't someone I could afford to take lightly. And if a simple tattoo was enough to unsettle her, I needed to know why. That, and also because, back in Ishtara, when I was on the verge of death, about to be swallowed alive by a spirit beast, I felt something. I felt a strange chill pierce my right forearm. Right where that tattoo was. Maybe it was nothing, maybe I was imagining it. But I didn't like unexplained coincidences. And I sure as hell didn't like mysteries. So while I was still in the archives, I figured I might as well dig up everything I could on warlock marks, whatever they were. So, what was the problem? Well, after flipping through 10 books, 7 vaguely worded reports, and a handful of logs filled with all kinds of supernatural jargon, I had nothing. Nothing except a few children's stories. Children's stories. That was all I had to work with. Out of everything, tomes detailing ancient spirit beasts, logs of forbidden alchemy experiments, even records of the spirit realm's known history, only fairy tales mentioned anything remotely similar to what I was looking for. Which meant one of 3 things. 1. Warlock marks were so rare that most records had been erased from history. Or, more likely, 2. I just hadn't been able to dig up the right research materials. And lastly 3. They could be the symbol of some criminal organization or secret society. There were numerous secret societies in this world, and plenty of villainous groups branded their members, just like the Yakuza did in the past. Either way, I had nothing useful. There were a few interesting stories, though. Like, The Boy Who Wished Upon a Black Star. I skimmed through its pages. The premise was simple: a foolish boy made a wish under a dark star. He begged for strength. The star granted it, but in return, the boy slowly lost his shadow, his voice, and eventually, his name. By the end, he wasn't even human anymore. Just a walking husk, existing only to fulfill the star's will. Dark, but hardly unique. I grabbed another storybook, The Nameless King, another tale of a king making a pact for power. He gained unmatched strength, ruled without equal, and then, shockingly, vanished from all records, as if history itself refused to acknowledge he had ever existed. I frowned. The other stories were no different. They all followed the same pattern. Someone wished for power or fame or something more profound. In return, they lost something equally valuable. Either that, or their wish was twisted so cruelly that it became a curse. And in the end, every single one of them was forgotten by the world and given a haunting title, The One Who Was. The moral of all those tales was the same: be careful what you wish for. I shut the last book and sighed. This was stupid. At best, these dark little fairy tales were written by the same author. Nothing more. I was wasting my time. Leaning back in my chair, I glanced up, only to see Michael staring at me. I squinted. What? Nothing. He shrugged. I just never saw you this serious before. What are you reading? I scowled. Doesn't concern you. Fine, don't tell me. He scoffed. But aren't you curious about what I'm researching? My scowl deepened. I sneered. How much do you overestimate your own importance? Why the fuck would I care what you do? After a brief silence, I shrugged. Besides, it doesn't take a genius to figure out you're researching the death zone where your parents disappeared. Michael raised a brow. You knew about that. I don't remember ever explicitly telling you. The whole high school knew. Michael practically gasped in mock exaggeration. And yet you still bullied the orphan son of 2 martyrs. I rolled my eyes. Michael, if I stopped my guys from picking on every single nerd with a sob story, they would have gone on a riot. Michael gave me a flat look. You're a jerk. I shook my head. No, I'm a self-aware hypocrite. Get your facts straight. He groaned. Then, after a beat of silence, he continued, the thing is, I never got my parents' bodies. The authorities only recovered their belongings, claiming they couldn't find them at all. But my father was one of the top survivalists. If he were alive, he would have made it back. And my mother was the best brawler in her guild. Not only did no one track them down, but there wasn't even a proper report on their disappearance. Michael leaned forward, over the stacks of books and documents he'd just spent hours sifting through, probably finding nothing useful, just like me. Even if they did die, the trackers, the clairvoyants, someone should have sensed something about them. His voice dropped slightly. I know I could be wrong, but my gut tells me something's off. He and his gut feeling. Even in the game, while he wasn't the smartest, Michael had a knack for sniffing out conspiracies. Well, I knew what happened to his parents. But I couldn't tell him. Not yet, because aside from the fact that I'd gain nothing from it, now wasn't the right time for him to find out the truth. I sighed. Yeah, that's very sad, dude. But, who asked? Michael stared at me in disgust. You really are Then he stopped. I stopped too. Phew, the shadow in that corner of the room, it moved. I stammered, did you see that? Quote. It must be our imagination, right? Michael swallowed hard. We both waited, unmoving. Then, in a display of unnatural speed, I hurled the storybook in my hand toward the shadowy corner. Silence. No sound came, not even the thud of the book hitting the ground. Just as we were about to stand, the book suddenly came flying back. I barely caught it before it smacked me in the face. Quote. 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 We stared at each other. Then at the book. Then back at the darkened corner. Slowly, Michael picked up the desk lamp and shone it at the shadows. The warm glow cut through the dimness, revealing absolutely nothing. No movement, no lurking figure, just shelves stacked with dusty tomes and a section of books arranged in an oddly perfect row. I stood up as calmly as I could. Michael did the same. Then, fuck, no, we ran, straight out of the room, out of the archives, and I personally swore to never set foot in that place again unless absolutely necessary. Chapter 159, Choices 3. The next day, it was time for my final class before the weekend, Advanced Combat Mechanics. Half of the first-year batch, all the cadets who had chosen this course as their last class of the day, stood in one of the training fields surrounding the Apex Tower. Standing before us was a tall man with an air of brutal authority shrouding him. He had a small mustache and judging by his receding hairline, he'd go bald in just a few months. Yet, his physique was commendable. And his presence was sharper than a veteran soldier who had survived 100 wars. That was Instructor Kane Reichardt, our physical conditioning coach, and a sadist who the Academy thought would be best suited to guide us in the art of combat as well. Because why not? Why shouldn't a deranged psycho like him, someone who enjoyed tormenting helpless teenagers in the name of training, get to teach 2 classes to the freshmen? Yeah, that was totally a sound decision. Instructor Kane's gaze swept over the gathered cadets. His hardened expression was one of perpetual disappointment, as if we'd already failed before even starting. Can anyone tell me, he began, voice cold and clipped, what the most important factor in a fight is? Silence. A few cadets glanced at each other, some hesitating to speak, others way too wary of giving the wrong answer. Instructor Reichardt sighed, shaking his head in disgust. Pathetic. You're all here to learn combat, yet none of you even have an opinion. His eyes landed on a boy near the front, one of the more studious types. Cadet, enlighten us. The boy straightened under the scrutiny. Strength, sir. Kane's lips curled into a humorless smirk. Strength is important, but strength alone won't save you when you're outmatched. Another cadet raised a hand hesitantly. Is it technique? Better, Kane allowed, but still wrong. Then, he began to pace before us. His boots struck the concrete floor in slow steps. Speed, endurance, intelligence, instincts, these are all valuable. But none of them matter if you don't have this. He stopped suddenly and looked at us. Control. Perhaps it was the gravitas in his heavy voice or the way he delivered that word, but everyone stared at him expectantly when he stopped, eager to hear the rest of his speech. In battle, control is everything. Control over your body, your movements, your emotions, and, if you are good enough, control over your opponent. His gaze flicked across the field, as if daring someone to speak up. No one did. Lose control, and you're already dead. A tense silence followed. Then Kane clapped his hands. Let's talk about a few examples, alright. We'll start with the most recent match that shook your entire batch when it happened. My ears perked, and suddenly, I felt every single eye in the field turning on me. Instructor Reichardt pointed at me with his chin. That's right, I'm talking about your ace facing 10 of some of the strongest cadets. Can anyone tell me how Lord Theosbane pulled off a win despite his numerical disadvantage? A few scoffed, a few sneered. He got lucky, someone whispered. He was underestimated. If they'd worked together, he would have lost, another joined in. I think the match was fixed, someone dared to accuse. I personally resisted the urge to punch that last guy, whoever it was. What do you mean it was fixed? I was stabbed and slashed like a cow being skinned in that fight. What other proof of authenticity did they want? I shook my head. Meanwhile, the smirk on Instructor Kane's face widened. Oh, luck and match fixing, huh? Those are some wild excuses. Some of the cadets were about to indignantly argue, but Reichardt pressed on. So if you were given a chance, you think you could defeat your ace for his title? Silence. Once again, Instructor Reichardt's smirk turned into a grin. I agree there are many other candidates in the top 10 or even among some of the high nobles who should be able to give a strong fight for the #1 spot. But the rest of you, all you could do is pathetically make excuses. Instructor Reichardt let his words settle, his grin sharpening as he observed the uncomfortable shifts and clenched jaws among the cadets. After a brief pause, he pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A holographic display projected over his head, showing the video of my match. Look here, he said, pointing at my figure in the video. Cadet Samael is clearly stronger and faster than each of his individual opponents. But strength and speed alone don't win fights when you're at a disadvantage, how you use them does. He let that sink in before continuing. His first big move set up everything. To take out the enemy healer, he had to go underground and emerge behind her. It was a simple trick, but one that dictated the rest of the fight. He fast-forwarded the video and gestured at the next sequence. Later, he did it again, this time against Cadet Reiner. But instead of coming out first, he attacked from under the ground, pinning Reiner in place while he was in the midst of retreat. The playback then fast-forwarded to the final exchange. And lastly, against Cadets Erwin and Sillin, he used the same trick again. But not quite. He created a crack behind them, leading them to believe he'd emerge from the rear. But instead, he attacked head-on. Instructor Reichardt turned to the class, keeping his expression unreadable. He used the same trick 3 times to take out some of the most troublesome opponents. But here's the key, he only attacked from behind once. The rest was conditioning, making them believe they knew his pattern when, in reality, he was controlling them. He let his gaze sweep over the field once more before delivering the final verdict. And that is how he won. Not by luck or fix, but by wits. The silence that followed was deafening. Some cadets shifted uncomfortably, while others refused to look back my way. What was I doing? Smiling smugly at them, of course. Instructor Reichardt crossed his arms. Let's go through a few more examples. And just like that, he showed us several more fights, some from upperclassmen, some even from past graduates. One in particular caught my attention. The current Cadet Council President, Vereshia Morrigan. Back in her second year, she had also issued a 10-on-1 title match, just like me. Except she was defending her title against the top 10 of her batch. And she won, unscathed, without taking a single wound. That match was brilliant. From start to finish, Vereshia displayed sheer battle intelligence and controlled her opponents with such ease that they may as well have been children. She forced them into awkward positions, evaded disadvantageous angles, dismantled their synergy, and dictated the flow of the entire fight. But above all, she effortlessly eliminated them all one after another in a display of unrivaled strength, and none of them could stop her. Damn, I muttered under my breath. She was on a different level. The video ended. Instructor Reichardt shut off the projection and gave us a pointed look. This is what separates a fighter from a strategist. Strength, speed, technique. They're just tools. But control turns tools into weapons. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. But most of you don't even know how to control your own breathing, let alone a battle. Some cadets bristled at that, but no one dared to raise an argument. Which is why, Rykard continued, his smirk returning, we're going to fix that. Right now. He turned and gestured toward the metallic training dummies lined up along the field. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. These, Rykard announced, are combat puppets. And unlike the usual ones you've trained with, these have been programmed to analyze your movements, predict your patterns, and counter your attacks. In other words, they get smarter the longer you fight them. A collective silence fell over the class. Rykard chuckled. Oh, don't look so scared. You all did sign up for advanced combat mechanics, didn't you? No, we didn't. It was a mandatory course. But he didn't care. Get ready, Instructor Kane barked. Each of you gets 2 puppets. Your goal is to outthink it. If you fight it head on, you lose. If you're predictable, you lose. If you waste time complaining, you lose. As the cadets reluctantly began forming pairs, I exhaled slowly. Great. A battle of wits against a learning AI. I sighed. I hate coming to class. Ha, I gasped and grunted frustratingly. After 20 whole minutes, I finally managed to destroy my combat puppets. Despite their sleek frames, those robots were strong. Ridiculously strong. Their metallic exterior was enchanted against elemental damage and durable enough to tank the full force of multiple siege engines. If that wasn't enough, they were also extremely fast and agile. You'd be lucky to hit them twice with the same attack. And there were 2 of them. I literally had to spam my innate power and contort the ground under them to win. Huffing, I straightened up. I wasn't truly tired, since after learning the essence circulation technique, my stamina and vitality had skyrocketed. And each day, my body only grew stronger using it. But continuously my origin card to perform transmutations on such a large scale was still a bit straining. Just a bit. The ground around me was broken by sharp spikes and towering concrete lances. Some spots were scorched black and others caved in like artificially created craters. Beneath my feet were the sparking remains of the combat puppets. I took a deep breath and dismissed my origin card, gazing at the rest of the field. Apparently, I was one of the few who passed. The rest of the cadets were sprawled on the ground, exhausted and defeated. Finally, Instructor Rykard took mercy on them and called back the combat puppets, ending his class. After giving us one last look of disgust, he dismissed us. As the cadets groaned and dragged themselves toward the exit, I dusted off my sleeves and stretched. Just as I was about to slip away with the rest of the group, an excited voice called out behind me. Nice job, Lord Samael. Before I could even react, something latched onto my right hand. Flinching, I looked down and saw a petite, orange-haired menace staring up at me with bright gray eyes. Alexia, I yelped, instinctively shaking my hand in a futile attempt to throw her off. She didn't budge. I shook harder. Still nothing. Are you secretly made of lead? I exclaimed. Alexia just grinned and tightened her grip. Nope, just good at holding on. I narrowed my eyes. That's not a skill people should brag about. Why not? It's super useful. Like, right now, for example. She gave my hand a firm shake, her enthusiasm completely unshaken by my irritation. I sighed, rubbing my temple with my free hand. All right, what do you want? She beamed. You, of course, or more specifically, to spar with you. I blinked. Excuse me, Alexia shrugged. We haven't had a proper fight since the evaluation exam. I've sparred with Michael since then, even defeated him a few times. But not you. I raised a brow. And, she continued, pointing at me dramatically, I bet I can beat you. I scoffed. That's a stupid bet. Her eyes narrowed humorously. Why? Because you can't. Also, I have no reason to accept. I tried prying my hand away, but Alexia refused to let go. Finally admitting defeat, I started walking. She tilted her head, smiling cheekily. Are you scared? I deadpanned. That is the single dumbest attempt at reverse psychology I've ever heard. She hummed. Maybe. But it worked, didn't it? I rolled my eyes. No, Tom. Before I could finish my sentence, I slammed into someone. Oh God, this is becoming a habit, I groaned internally and looked up. Please don't let it be. Jake. Green eyes. Green hair. A body that had lost even more of its chubbiness since the last time I saw him. Yeah, it was Jake Melflazer. And he was looking at me with unfiltered, unrelenting hate. Oh, Come on. 160. The first thing I did was take a deep breath. Then I immediately turned around and tried to leave. Jake, however, had apparently become fast. Too fast. Before I could make my escape, he slipped around and blocked my path by coming to stand in front of me. I stopped short and let out an audible groan. Why couldn't I have one easy day? Alexia summoned her origin card, no doubt trying to make sense of the situation. Then she tilted her head, leaned in close to my ear, and whispered, "Ah, isn't he your fat friend?" I sighed and whispered back, "Fat? Yes. Friend? No." She batted her lashes. "What happened to him?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" Alexia hesitated for a beat before replying, "His aura, it's dark. Darker than I remember." My frown deepened. I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but before I could, Jake furiously stepped forward upon seeing I wasn't paying attention to him. "Hey!" he shouted. His voice rang through the training field, catching the attention of the other cadets who were still hanging back after class. I groaned again but quickly adjusted my expression, turning to him with a bright smile on my face. It was the type of smile you'd give a long-lost friend. "My boy, Jake, what's up?" I greeted as if I had only just noticed him. "Look at you, man. Did you shed even more weight? Every time I see you, you're looking leaner. Keep it up." "All right, see you." Jake, unfortunately, did not seem in the mood for pleasantries. "Shut it," he barked. I blinked, feigning offense. "Whoa, someone's got a temper today." Jake glared at me, his fist clenched. "You think this is funny?" "Yes," I said immediately. He paused. Then, in an instant, his expression shifted, mirroring mine. A wide grin stretched across his face. "Too wide." "Of course," he scoffed, stepping forward one more time. "Everything's amusing to you these days, isn't it? The whole world is one big joke, existing solely for your entertainment, Lord Theosbane." I took a step back in response. "But I warned you, didn't I?" His voice hardened. "Just yesterday, I told you to watch where you were going. And yet, here we are, you bumping into me again. You don't take me seriously. You think I'm a joke, just like everything else. Isn't that right?" Another step, and suddenly, he was right in front of me, his face mere inches from mine. And he still wasn't done shouting. "Well, I'm not like anyone else anymore. I'm special, I'm the chosen one, I'm stronger, I'm better than even you, than everyone else. You can't take me lightly anymore. You can't make fun of me anymore." His smile slowly disappeared. With each word he spat, his face continued to twist in rage, his eyes darkening in resentment, and his voice full of venom for me. For the world. A tense silence followed his outburst. I stared at him, blinked, then slowly turned to Alexia. "Did he just?" She nodded solemnly. "Yeah, the chosen one?" I asked. She nodded again. I turned back to Jake, who was still seething, his breath coming in heavy bursts. He looked like he was seconds away from either attacking me or spontaneously combusting. I exhaled through my nose. "Jake." He bared his teeth at me. "What?" I patted his shoulder. "Buddy, has someone been feeding you prophecy books?" Jake smacked my hand away. "I knew you wouldn't take me seriously. You never did. All our lives, you kept me by your side so I'd make you look good. But that will change now." "That's not true," I said. "I took you very seriously when you tried to sit on me in the 5th grade." His left eye twitched. "See," I continued, "I remember so many moments where I took you seriously. Like that time you challenged me to a hot dog eating contest and almost choked to death. Or when you swore you could do a backflip and just didn't." Jake just let out a guttural growl. I opened my mouth to give him a few more examples, but he suddenly lunged. Alexia finally let go of my hand and jumped away. I also hopped back in a different direction, dodging Jake's fist as it slammed into the ground. Thwam! A shockwave exploded from the impact, cracking the earth and sending dust into the air. The cadets watching gasped. Some even stepped back. Jake slowly straightened, his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that hadn't been there before. "Fine then, Samael. I wasn't going to start with you, but you've left me with no choice. I'll show you. I'll show everyone." I sighed, dusting off my sleeves. "Is this the part where I'm supposed to say I don't want to fight you, Jake?" "Yes," he shouted. "And then I'm supposed to say you don't have a choice. Because Samael Kaiser Theosbane, I challenge you to a rite of valor." Wow, seriously. For a second, and for the first time in my life, I was almost impressed with Jake. No matter what may have been the reason behind his confidence, issuing that challenge was a gutsy move. A rite of valor was a sacred one-on-one duel exclusive to the Theosbane bloodline and those we recognized as warriors. It was an ancient, unspoken law within my family, where grievances were settled through combat, and victory determined who held authority or respect. The rules were rather simple. Once challenged, the other party must accept unless they yield their honor. The duel continues until one side is unable to fight or forfeits. Everything is allowed, but outside interference is forbidden. A witness is required to confirm the outcome. The winner of the right earned the right to claim something from the defeated, whether it was respect, an apology, or even an oath of loyalty. Meanwhile, the loser must bear the shame of their loss. Historically, my family used this dueling tradition to settle disputes over inheritance, honor, and leadership within their ranks. In rare cases, a rite of valor could even determine life and death. Although the tradition had weakened over the years, it still held power within Theosbane circles and those who followed our warrior customs. But since Jake wasn't a Theosbane, it was bold, and offensive, of him to invoke a rite of valor against me. It suggested that he saw himself as a warrior of equal standing, someone worthy of challenging a Theosbane on their own terms. I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding and looked at the green-haired boy seriously. Okay, if that is your wish, then I accept. Technically, since he was neither from my family and nor my family's knight, I had the right to refuse. But as I said, it was offensive that he used my family's tradition against me. He needed to be put in his place. Everyone here will count as the witness, I declared. And I'll officiate the rite myself. Take whatever you wish from me if you win. If you lose, I don't want anything, any problem. Jake merely growled in response like a rabid animal waiting to be unleashed. Okay, then, I sighed. There are no rules to this combat. Victory will be determined when either of us can't continue the fight. There will be no draws. The duel will end when a decisive result is achieved. If either of us dies here, may the gods have mercy on our souls. Let justice be done today, even if the heavens fall. The surrounding cadets could hardly believe what they had just heard. Jake, the walking joke of the infamous underwear incident, had just challenged Samael Kaiser Theosbane to a duel. And even more shocking was the fact that Samael accepted. Since most of them knew very little about the Theosbane family's customs and traditions, they couldn't understand why Samael didn't just deny Jake's demand for a duel. He could have ignored it or refused outright. Yet, he didn't. Regardless, a fight was about to break out. And word of it spread fast. Cadets who had dragged themselves out of the training field moments ago came rushing back in. The exhaustion on their faces from earlier was gone, now replaced by burning excitement. They weren't about to miss this. And they didn't, because as soon as Samael finished his announcement, Jake charged head-on and summoned his origin card. A super-solid silver orb of mercury materialized above his outstretched palm, rippling like molten metal before shifting into the shape of a massive battle axe. Samael remained standing still, looking as calm as he was about to take a stroll, as his own origin card flared into existence over his head in a flash of golden light. Jake roared and swung first, cleaving his axe in a brutal horizontal arc from the left. The force of his strike tore through the air, sending a sharp gust of wind howling across the field. But Samael simply ducked under the incoming silver blade, letting the axe harmlessly pass over his head. Jake gritted his teeth in frustration and willed his weapon to shift shape. The axe melted and reformed into a greatsword in the blink of an eye. Jake stepped forward until he was beside Samael, who was still crouched low on the ground. Then, in a blur of motion, Jake whipped his greatsword toward Samael's exposed back. Tom, what the? But the blade never hit its mark. At the last possible second, a concrete polearm erupted from the ground, intercepting Jake's sword before it could bite into Samael's flesh. Because of the awkward angle, Jake couldn't generate enough force to slice apart the stone, and it resulted in his attack being easily blocked. Samael moved fast. Before Jake could recoil, the golden-haired ace stood back up and trapped the greatsword by wrapping an arm around the blade. Then, Samael swiveled, and with a sharp twist, he yanked the sword clean out of Jake's hands. The sudden pull wrenched Jake off balance and made him trip forward, wide open for a follow-up attack. And Samael didn't let that opportunity go to waste. Before Jake could even think about regaining his footing, a massive concrete mace came crashing down onto the back of his head. Thwam! The sheer force of impact shattered the mace into countless stone shards, and Jake found himself sprawled on the ground, face first. Ah, that polearm! It had been the handle. After tripping Jake off balance, Samael must have tugged on the concrete pole, pulled out the mace from the ground, and bashed his head in with it, all in a single, fluid motion. Jake barely had time to process it before Samael threw his greatsword away. Far, far away, at the edge of the training field. Jake could shape his mercury orb into any weapon or armor he wished, but he couldn't control it remotely. Like any weapon, he had to physically wield it to use it. And now, it was out of reach. Of course, he could always dismiss and resummon his origin card, but that would take time. A second or two, at best. But the problem was Samael wasn't about to give him that time. Of course he wasn't. Jake groaned and weakly pushed himself up, only for a hand to seize his emerald green hair and yank his head back. Then, crack, a knee smashed into his face with such force that his head snapped backward. Jake felt something break. A tooth, maybe. His vision swam as he looked up at the azure sky, stretching out in a dizzying blur of blue. How was Samael this strong? This wasn't how it was supposed to go down. Jake was supposed to be stronger. He was the chosen one. His guardian angel told him that. So, how? Before he could finish that thought, Samael hauled him up and drove a straight punch into his face. Jake staggered back, blood filling his mouth. Desperate, he lashed out and swung a wild, flailing fist forward. And it connected. Against all odds, it connected with Samael's right shoulder. Something cracked under his knuckles, and almost instantly, a red stain bloomed across Samael's vest, blood soaking through the fabric. A wound. He wounded him, but it was nowhere near enough. Jake's breath hitched. He had put everything behind that punch, all his newly acquired strength. And yet, he failed to push Samael back even a step. Not even a step. Jake barely had time to process his disbelief before a vicious kick slammed into his chin. His head snapped back again, and this time his body followed. He crashed onto his back with a grunt. And then, Samael was on him. The golden-haired boy mounted him and began hammering down punches, one after another, each one brutal enough to crack the ground beneath Jake's skull. Jake tried to fight back. He tried to summon his cards. His origin card. But the pain. Oh, God. The agony. He couldn't focus. Tham, Tom. Jake's vision blacked out in flickering intervals each time Samael's fist slammed down on his face. And in between those blackouts, during those fleeting moments of clarity, he saw Samael. His former friend's expression was unreadable. His golden eyes were devoid of anger or cruelty or sorrow. There was not a shred of emotion on Samael's face, just cold indifference. It was as if the moment the fight began, Samael had stopped seeing Jake as a person. Jake's consciousness began to slip. But before he passed out, he made a vow to himself. One day, he would make Samael regret this. No, not just him. Samael, Michael, and every last cadet who had laughed at him. He had been foolish today. But he wouldn't be again. Jake forced open his bloodied mouth, several teeth broken, and weakly groaned, "I'll show yo." Crack. Samael drove one last punch into his face, silencing him for good. And just like that, the rite of valor ended in under 10 minutes.